Welcome to Developing the Leadership Pipeline. I am Jai Vargas, your host, VP of Strategic Engagements and Initiatives here at the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility. I hope you're enjoying today's programming and are posting about our annual symposium on all of your social media networks. Remember, our hashtag is HACR Symposium 21. Today's session is sponsored by Altria. Altria is a continued sponsor of HACR with a real commitment to Hispanic inclusion. We appreciate your continued support and thank you so much for your dedication to the Hispanic community. I would like to now introduce our moderator for today's session. Her name is Sylvia Perez-Cash, and she is the SVP of Operations right here at HACR. Thank you all so much for being here. Sylvia, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jai. And thank you, Altria, for sponsoring this conversation today. Today, we're talking about the best practices for developing a diverse leadership pipeline that recognizes and invests in the talent and leadership of all employees. This topic has come up in each conversation that we've had today during the HACR Symposium. We've talked about ERG engagement with pipeline development strategies and the importance of partnerships generally. We saw how diversity-related data is integral to CDOs as they too focus on the leadership pipeline. And we just heard stories, personal stories from Latinas in tech, where the lack of diversity in tech leadership pipelines has not only been well-researched, but has also attracted significant public and private investment over the last few years. This is clearly an important aspect of our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And that's why I'm thrilled, absolutely thrilled, to have a deeper conversation about this topic today. Carly Sanchez is the Executive Vice President and Head of Talent Acquisition and Strategy and Delivery at Wells Fargo's Bank. Please join me on stage today.
And thanks, Sylvia. And I'm so glad to be here and glad to hear that this is a topic that's front of mind for so many people. Again, I serve as Global Head of Talent Acquisition, which is all the hiring for Wells Fargo globally. And this is a role that has really grown out of a real deep passion that I have for providing opportunities, particularly for many who may not even realize that opportunities are available. So my full career, the first half of my career was in higher education, where I served as a director of admissions, most currently before I went into the corporate world at Harvard University's Graduate School of Education, which was my undergraduate institution, and now have a history with a number of different organizations, particularly in the financial services, with leading talent acquisition, with a strong emphasis on diversity and inclusion. So delighted to be here to have this conversation.
So we know that research matters, data matters, and there's been a lot of research done about the pipeline in corporate America, particularly about the glass barrier that occurs when mid-level managers of color, women and people of color, are trying to transition from their roles into senior and executive positions. This drop-off is particularly attributed to increased importance of executive networks when rising through the corporate pipeline. So with this in mind, I would like to open the conversation with a discussion about relationships, networking, whether that comes in the form of sponsorships or mentorships or another form. But could you describe kind of what the importance is and how you view the importance of network building within your leadership pipeline, specifically for your diverse talent pool?
One of the things that we've identified at Wells Fargo that certainly is in all the research is how challenging that can be for diverse communities and for our rising talent in the organization, especially when we know that at the senior level in many corporations, including our own, we're challenged to make sure that we're as diverse as we should be. And so not only does it not provide the opportunity to even see oneself in those roles as often as we should, but also it means that if you want to partner or be sponsored by somebody who's diverse, then the options are limited. In a large corporation too, it's just challenging to be able to get the visibility, to be able to get to know the executives when we have close to 265,000 people in the organization globally. So just being able to get exposure is a challenge. So some of the efforts that we're making is looking at how to drive that connectivity there. I think the other piece of that, and this was certainly something that I learned on a personal level way in my career, which I had learned earlier, is that there are also cultural challenges, particularly in the Latino community, when we think about exposure to the more senior levels. So, for example, we are very hierarchical, and research bears that out. And so the idea that one would just approach a senior executive to get to know them or to share who you are just is foreign to us, and certainly was to me. I often got feedback, you need to get yourself out there in front of the operating committee and make sure that they're getting to know you. Well, for me, that was very disrespectful to take up their time just to get to know me. And so we had to figure out ways to have very concrete information that you had a reason to share with more senior executives in order to have that visibility. So one of the things that, for example, we're trying to do is identify ways that we can systematically and programmatically provide greater exposure for rising talent, particularly diverse talent in the organization, rather than leaving it to them to do that for themselves. So just a few thoughts on that.
I want to go back to what you said about some of the two things that you said. One about recognizing and spotlighting some of the cultural barriers, but also changing the system and changing who you make accountable for those changes and shifting to the institution and away from the individual. Could you speak to us a little bit about how that change in thought occurred at Wells Fargo and how it shows up today in your work? Where are you really focusing on making sure that shift is occurring, where the institution is taking more accountability on addressing these challenges?
Great question, because some of the, as we say, for many who are involved in work related to diversity and inclusion, it's a patient group of people, right? Because these are slow issues to grow and evolve. But I will say that over the last, I've been at Wells Fargo for 8 years, and so certainly we've been making strong efforts with our employee resource networks groups for looking at mentoring programs, but not sponsorship programs until this year, which I think was also challenging. But this year, and some of that emanated, I'll be fully frank, out of some of the negative press we got as a result of Charlie Scharf's comment that was picked up in the press of black talent in the workplace. So we know that is not reflective of how he thinks about diverse talent and the importance of that. And so he's taken huge steps forward to identify ways that we can support our diverse communities. And so we have now a strong group of Black African American senior leaders that meets with Charlie on a regular basis. Excuse me. Charlie and Cleber Santos, who is leading all of our diversity efforts, and also the Latino senior executives, as well as then adding on API executives. And so out of that has come a huge body of work to say, what is it that's missing from the lens of our diverse leaders? So it's not just having somebody else identify what's missing, but the accountability is a dual accountability. So it's saying, you'd give us some advice. We want to hear from you. You tell us what we think on a very concrete basis is missing. Where do we need to invest money? Where do we need to invest resources? And how can we hold all leaders accountable for these efforts? And so many of us meet on a regular monthly basis with Charlie and Cleber to have these conversations. But we also know that we've had literally dozens of initiatives that have come out of those meetings that are now being implemented. And I would say that the accountability falls as heavily to the senior executive group as at large, as well as it does to the diverse leaders. And so that I think is super important, because everyone understands it's a joint responsibility. Our senior leaders are held accountable in both their reviews as well as compensation review. And also we have regular monthly meetings. All of our business unit review meetings review a lot of the data associated with this. And so the accountability is on a regular basis, not a once a year basis.
Great. Well, you answered one of the next questions I was going to ask you, but how do you hold your senior leadership accountable? And what I heard is a very thoughtful but very integrated check-in system, effectively, that is supported by compensation metrics, that's supported by performance metrics in a way that says, no, this is your responsibility as well. So that's wonderful to hear. And I think that complements what you shared about creating the programmatic opportunities for Spotlight. So the two are happening simultaneously.
Right.
Well, let's talk about, in addition to the network development and the mentorship and sponsorship, there are other strategies, right, that really are important to developing diverse leadership pipelines. So I want to make sure that we dedicate some time in our conversation to highlight some of those, both for companies that may be looking for new areas of work and new ways to approach this in their companies, and maybe for others who just want to figure out how to enhance what they're doing. So with that in mind, what are some specific strategies within your pipeline development toolkit that have been particularly important to your engagement with and development of women and people of color?
So first of all, I would be remiss as the head of talent acquisition if I didn't talk a little bit about some of the talent acquisition strategies, and that's both for internal and external talent. So one of the things that we have in place is a candidate slate requirement, and that's for the majority of the positions across the company. And that means that when you're looking at candidates to interview, 50%, essentially 50% of the candidates should be diverse and at least one dimension. And so we run data reports on that regularly, as well as the interview teams, because we know that if you're someone who is diverse and you're interviewing with all white males, for example, that may give a message that's an unintended message, but perhaps not a great message. And so we also have accountability measures for making sure that the interview teams are diverse as well. And so what big emphasis in talent acquisition is the sourcing of great strategies so that great talent, so that we're prepared and we always have top talent fueling that pipeline both internally and externally. In addition, our senior executives do talent reviews for people who are rising at near the top of the house and are looking at with a strong emphasis on diverse talent to say, okay, who's ready? Are they on succession plans? If they're not on succession plans yet, what's missing in terms of their ability to be immediate successors, and how are we going to put into place development plans? Who's a sponsor for this person, et cetera. So there are a number of different pieces directly associated with the talent. But one of the other issues that came out of the meetings that we've had with our diverse executives has to do with visibility. And I think that one is a little bit harder to wrap your hands and arms around, to say, gee, if we have this great talent here at the organization, who knows them? How do you know them? Have you seen their work in action, et cetera? Who knows them in the community? And so we're trying to look at a number of initiatives that have come out of the executives meetings to say, okay, what are the opportunities for exposure, both internally and externally, including can we identify board seats that might be great for some of the senior leaders that we have? Where are they with the employee resource network groups? Are they visible with up and coming talent, even less senior than they are? How are we doing in terms of exposure to senior executives and sponsorships? So many different initiatives that said, how do we give more visibility? You may have seen more recently a number of diverse Wells Fargo senior executives being interviewed externally in the press on different topics that are topics that they're very knowledgeable on. And that's highly intentional on our part to make sure that not only are they providing great insights from their own specific skill set and knowledge, but that they're getting the visibility externally, whereas it might have simply gone to the same group of people that normally are seen in the press. So just a few thoughts and ideas on that.
Thank you. And I want to kind of dive down a second layer to that conversation, taking us back to your earlier comment about being aware of cultural norms and being aware that some cultural norms could exclude members of your workforce from some of these very active, very intentional strategies. So you mentioned one in terms of sponsorship. Can you think of others that companies either overlook or that companies should be prepared to address, just from your experience in the field, things that you have seen over the years?
Well, certainly, and I think this won't be a surprise to anyone, the issue of unconscious bias has to be actively addressed, because it's quite clear that there may be bias that many diverse executives or up and coming leaders and talent are dealing with, and that may be the root of some of the lack of recognition or promotion that they're seeing. And so what we've done is say it's really important for all of our managers and leaders to be able to understand more about the unconscious bias and where that could play into their own actions. I think we all know we have our own biases, so it's not just non-diverse leaders who have biases, but everyone has biases. And so we're actively engaged in training and really very concrete, sometimes difficult conversations. So I think having the uncomfortable conversation to bring people forward in terms of understanding different perspectives and lenses has been really important and often very emotional for people. But I think you almost have to go through that kind of transition to say, okay, this is not a check the box exercise, but one where I really have to get to know myself better. Others have to get to know themselves better, and we have to have very frank and open conversations. So a lot of that is happening in terms of unconscious bias.
Great. Thank you. And so, and I mean, I also agree that unconscious bias is one of those areas of learning that you just can't stop learning about, because so much of it is tied to your individual reflection. But as we've said, and what I really want to keep a focus on is that individualism is closely tied to an institution and to a system that supports a certain approach to pipeline development. So that have the two hand in hand is an important lens.
Right.
As you know, HACR is a very strong advocate for data collection. And so I don't want to miss out on the importance of data in this entire process. It's a very complicated process called pipeline development, right? HACR openly advocates through our Corporate Inclusion Index and other forums about data, the importance of data collection, benchmarking, tracking, really using that data to make strategic decisions. But we know that strong data management systems support organizational learning systems, and that those combined are key to adjusting strategies in real time and helping those strategies address real goals. And so with that in mind, I wonder if you could speak to, from your role and your perspective, how important is data to your pipeline development strategies? Where do you think Wells Fargo is doing this really well? And where do you think you would like more data on that we could use a little bit more emphasis?
Well, certainly HACR has been a great partner and really always a great reminder of the importance of data in all that we're doing. And I think that's an ongoing journey for us, although I am really proud of the fact that the organization has taken that very seriously and is focused on that. So we've always done the more traditional data reviews for promotion rates or hiring rates, et cetera, to see where we might have gaps and where we can improve. But I think we're doing a lot deeper dive into data research. And in fact, Charlie Scharf brought in an external organization to do some very deep dives into our data to be able to share with our senior leadership team insights in terms of the data and the progression of the data in their own businesses. And so obviously that's held highly confidentially out of respect to our employees, but it is important for us to understand where we have gaps or where we have opportunities. And so we have done external reviews on data, as well as we're doing our own internal reviews. I think one of the things that we're looking forward to, I have to say, is the fact that we've been on multiple different platforms that don't really talk to each other that well. And so our technology has been somewhat of a limitation. And so as of January, we will be joining our international group as well as our US HR programs onto one Workday platform. And so that will help us be able to see in a much more unified way a lot of the data. And it'll also give us access to information that our own employees want to share with us. So they can develop their talent profiles that we can tap into for looking at who may be ready for roles or even interested in particular kinds of roles or in locations that they want to live, et cetera. So we're super excited about the fact that that Workday unified platform will give us much more opportunity to see the data, to understand the data, to hear from our employees with what they'd like to submit about themselves, et cetera. So that will certainly allow us a lot more flexibility and insight in terms of how we move forward.
I think that it raised an interesting thought in my mind listening to your response there, is that even in the data collection process, you're listening to your employees. We talked a little bit earlier in the day about the importance of listening to our employees when it comes to ERG engagement and formulation. But haven't really spoken much today about the importance of it even in data collection, right? And thinking about there's lots of things we want to know, but that's not always the same as what people want to share. And so keeping that in mind as a key component of how we structure the data that's supporting this important work. So really, thank you for bringing that, highlighting that perspective. I'd be curious, so when you think, so I hear that Wells Fargo is really venturing into this new platform, this new technology, this integration system. So I applaud you in that regard. I would love to know kind of what excites you most, the opportunity there when you think about where you'll be able to leverage data differently, the impact that particular integration or any other in your journey is how it's going to impact diversity in your leadership pipeline specifically and some of your goals around that.
Well, certainly, I think we have a huge talent acquisition operation. And so we hire, somewhere anywhere between 50 and 100,000 people a year into positions. And so getting to know our internal talent better on an individual basis is for me a real opportunity, because at the moment, it's very difficult to really understand individuals across the organization, because there are so many people who are looking to identify new roles and new ways of growing their careers. And so to be able to access what they've put live into the system, to say this is a direction they'd like to go, where our recruiters can really tap in with the hiring managers to see who might be ready for a new role and who might be interested in a new role. So we've also redesigned our job architecture system so that we'll be able to identify skills that are equivalent skills across numerous jobs across the company, so that an employee can understand, I have this skill set, but what other roles could I be looking at? And at the moment, it's difficult to find out. So that job architecture redesign goes into effect in January as well. And so that will allow us a lot of flexibility in terms of really analyzing the data of who has what skill set, where might they be appropriate to grow their careers, and then to also dive into the data within the system. At the same time, we're encouraging self-identification in a number of different diverse dimensions for our employees, because obviously we have to be respectful of where they want to self-identify, either by race or ethnicity or any other diverse dimension, all of which are important to us to help us to know how well are we doing and what progress are we making. So all of that data internally will be helpful. And then certainly just having consistent systems across the globe for us in understanding our talent base and our employee base will be very helpful for us to be able to do deeper analysis as well.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to take this conversation back just a little bit farther to your comments about college admissions. And we think about the pipeline starting, again, being very complex and involving many layers of systems in our country, with higher education, middle school education, all the way through the corporate ladder. I wonder, could you reflect a little bit on the connection between the two and what you learned from higher ed, particularly that has given you particular insight into doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, thanks. It was a little while ago since I did higher ed admissions. I started out in undergraduate admissions at Harvard. And I think one of the real lessons that stuck with me, and one of the real drivers of my passion around this, is when you first started in admissions, you were assigned literally a number of states that you were responsible for. And so it was really a matter of working with our alumni and tapping in and learning the high schools and all of the different sources of students who might be potential talent to go to Harvard. The thing that I think translates beyond Harvard and to not only many other institutions, but also work, is how much talent is out there that never knows that they have the opportunity that could potentially drive their career, drive their education, et cetera. And so unless there is an intentional strategy to find that talent, to play a level playing field, providing financial support, equal opportunity, that talent may go really untapped, which is a real loss for our whole country, to not be able, actually globally too, to not be able to tap into talent that's there and just has no idea how talented they are. So my undergraduate experience really fueled everything that I've done in my entire life, is to be able to see where that talent is. And it stemmed originally also from my own family. My dad grew up in a little town called Eagle Pass, Texas. His family moved to California. They really had, some limits in terms of where they could go. And he started out in the service, in the military. And that was one of the great advantages for him, to be able to grow his career and his education through that, and then continue it after he got out of the military. And so I think we have to remember that so many people start with limitations. My husband as well went into the military, grew up, was the first in his family and to come out of the South Valley in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for those of you who know that area, and ended up with his doctoral degree and 3 other degrees from Harvard, just by virtue of somebody encouraging him and identifying his talent that he could bring to higher ed and to the world. And so I think it's we can't lose sight of individual efforts to recognize talent, but also then make them more systematic. And so, connecting back with having a workday system or another platform where we can actually begin to really understand the talent out there, as well as critical national partnerships and programs and partnerships with organizations like HACR that really help us to do a much better job of that, to understand the communities that we serve, where the talent is, how we can connect better, how we should provide support. All of those things connected the dots for me, and why I feel privileged every day just to do the work that I do.
Thank you. So I want to just tell the audience we're about to open it up to questions from the audience. So if you've been saving one, please put it into the chat and we will be sure to address it. I'm going to jump in a little bit while the questions come in about the partnerships. And so, you mentioned kind of that being a part of how either at whatever point in the pipeline that you're focused on, how you add value, how you make sure that you're not missing talent, right? That you're seeing everybody and you're really creating spaces for everybody to show up. So, Wells Fargo is a valued member of HACR. We know we're one of many partnerships that you have. Could you describe the value add of affinity-based partnerships specifically for your leadership pipeline strategies?
Absolutely. And those are essential for us, just even within talent acquisition, let alone in our broader DE&I organization. Those partnerships play a critical role, not only for helping to really point out issues, to help keep us educated and focus on areas where we should be, but to identify ways that we can impact our communities, to identify ways that we can develop programs and provide funding for programs that will impact financial awareness, for example, or financial education, or scholarship programs, or a whole long list of partnerships that we have that really help us to be impactful in ways that we couldn't do it without those partnerships. And so that we have, as I mentioned, a number of different partnerships through our foundation. We have it through our military programs. We have it through the talent acquisition program, through our DE&I programs. Gigi Dixon, many of you are familiar with, and Jimmy Paschal have been leading a lot of this effort. And I think the impact is beyond even recognition. And sometimes you are a voice of our conscience, to be able to say, you may not understand the impact that you're having or not having. And so those very honest, open conversations and relationships we have are very important as an organization for us to be able to lean on and to learn from.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to open it up to the first question that we have here. And I think this is related to some of the comments that we shared today about unconscious bias. And so this question is about blind resumes. Particularly with large companies like Wells Fargo, using these blind resumes, using tech platforms to receive interest from candidates is a big part of efficiencies. It's also a part of removing or eliminating, reducing unconscious bias. But could you speak to, how that's actually working out? Is that successful approach, or is that something that has to be complemented with other techniques around unconscious bias? What are your views on blind resumes?
So it's a great topic, and it's one that we revisit on a regular basis. I think there are positives to that, but there are also areas that we have concern we haven't figured out how to overcome yet. So I'm going to share an example from someone who many of you may have known in the past. He's recently retired, but I know he would be happy to have me share this example because he's shared it publicly. And that's Jose Garcia, who used to lead our national programs and partnerships. And when we were reviewing most recently, before he retired, the issue of moving to blind resumes, he came right out and said, I understand removing the name, but if you're really going to make my resume a blind resume, you've removed all the experience and my whole career. And so he said, all the work that I've done that would identify that I'm Hispanic would be removed. All the work that I've done to identify organizations that I've been part of, recognitions that I've received, he said, would all have been removed from my resume. And he said, to be honest, there would be nothing left of my resume. And so it was a real eye opener, I think, for many of us in that conversation to say that's probably true of many of us, where in the effort to try to be eliminate any mention, you may in fact undercut the talent and the history that person brings to an organization. So I think what we have to do is figure out how do we make sure that we're sourcing. We obviously have to make sure that in affirmative action rules and regulations that we are very compliant and ensuring that we're meeting legal requirements as well. But that being said, one of the efforts that we've done is to certainly make sure that we are sourcing as broadly as we can and building our diverse talent pools. So there is plenty of talent to fuel those diverse candidate slates. And so when you get ready to review candidates, we know that those slates are diverse. So it's not as much a matter of the resume as it is the effort to build your talent pools. And so that's where we currently are. I'm not going to tell you that we won't continue to review that and see if there are different ways that we can address that. But I do think that there is some inherent concern about making it so neutral that you actually miss the background history and value that someone may have brought to their entire career.
Thank you. I think that's such a key point. Thank you for that reflection. Here's another question from Valerie from the audience. Could you share some best practices on helping to overcome increasing disengagement from high potential people of color employees?
Great question again. So I think that one of the reasons that we're doing as much as we are to engage with our senior leaders, to have them play an active role in sponsoring and mentoring, to be part of the efforts that we're making in terms of outreach or growing and developing different organizations within our own communities that we serve, or serving with our employee resource network groups, is to give connectivity with senior leaders, both diverse and non-diverse, with our employees as they're coming up through the organization. And so being able to have more exposure, to learn from more senior people, I think is one way to ensure that engagement. It's a minute by minute kind of thing. And here's what I mean by that. I think we all know that the last year and a half that we've lived through with the pandemic has just been wrought with challenges. And so to have everybody go remote at once was certainly a challenge in terms of getting work done, but we did that. And then the challenge becomes when I, for example, have a team of 800 people across the globe. How do you stay in touch with them when they're not meeting with other people, they're not having coffee, they're not meeting mentors in the hall, all of that went away. Certainly we have Zoom conferences and we have Zoom meetings, et cetera, but we've had to figure out creative ways to have conversations. So we've done that through technological tools to have communities that, for example, for my team across the globe, where we share best practices, or we share things that are working well and not working so well, or stories of what our families are doing during the pandemic, so that we've kept people actively engaged there. But we also, I think, as leaders have had to do things differently. So, one of the things that I was very worried about for my team being so large and dispersed, really all over the country and all over the globe, is how do I stay in touch and hear from them front and center and really hear directly from them? So I have regular calls that where we send out invitations, and the first 30 people get onto that call. And it happens at least on a monthly basis. We're actually making them more regular now. And that's an opportunity. When that call happens, it's an hour that I spend with those employees. They can ask anything they want. They can give me any suggestions they want. They can ask for information about the company as a whole. And I'll share whatever I possibly can share. I'll identify what I don't know or what I'm not at liberty to share yet. But all of us are staying in touch with each other through vehicles like that and getting to know each other. And what I find is that spreads. So the employees that get on those calls really enjoy being able to hear from each other as well as from me about what's going on in the company. And they go back and tell other people about it. And so I think that we have to be creative in terms of the tools that we're using to make sure that we don't lose that human connectivity, particularly in difficult times like this. And certainly for our racially and ethnically diverse team members, ensuring that we're mentoring, we're sponsoring, and that's a requirement for our senior leaders as well, to ensure that they are mentoring and sponsoring.
Thank you. So, Carla, I can't believe it. We only have a minute left before I invite Jai back to close this out for this session. So my last question for you, and kind of your last 60-second response, take it home to the audience, is how can companies instill a culture of intentional inclusion when thinking about their pipeline?
I think listen, and you called that out. Listen to your employees, listen to your senior leaders, do your research, figure out where you have gaps, where people are not moving through your system and finding success in terms of their careers, and watch your attrition. That'll tell you a story about why people are leaving as well. So I think the most important thing is to keep your ears open, to not assume that you know that people are being included, but doing your research and listening to make sure that you know why or why not. Great.
Carly, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your insights and your takeaways from a dedicated career. I want to acknowledge Kathy Smith, who wasn't able to join us, but she was very excited for this conversation. So even though you couldn't be a part of it, thank you as well, Kathy, for joining us today. And with that, Jai, I welcome you back to the stage.
Thank you, Sylvia. What a great conversation it was. Thank you so much, Carly and Kathy. We missed you for those thoughtful insights on leveraging the talent you currently have to lead them through the leadership pipeline. Our next session is titled Corporate Boards, Who's Missing? It will be starting soon in the auditorium, followed by our final networking session of the day. Please make sure that you have your LinkedIn profile links at hand, because we have some incredible attendees that are ready to network with you. I look forward to meeting you all there, and thank you so much for being part of our symposium program.